Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast with your hosts, Betsy Westhafer and Tony Bodoh. Join Betsy and Tony as they dive in with highly successful C-suite leaders who have grown successful organizations by creating a laser focus on listening to their customers and building deep customer relationships. Now, it's time to join Betsy and Tony for the Really Know Your Customer show.
Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast. My name is Tony Bodoh, and I am here today with Betsy and with our guest, Joe Lynch. Joe is the founder of a consulting company in the logistics industry, and I'm going to let Betsy tell you a little bit more about him.
Yeah, so Joe is the founder of the Logistics of Logistics. He's got an amazing following on LinkedIn, huge group, like over 100,000, I believe. And it's a sales and marketing firm that helps transportation, logistics, warehousing, technology firms just really understand how to grow their sales and marketing. Joe started his career in the automotive sector and now is just completely focused on transportation and logistics industry. So, Joe, we are very happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Betsy. I'm really looking forward to it. We had some great conversations while we were prepping, and I learned a lot just from those conversations, so thank you.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more. I kind of hit the highlights, but tell us more about your early career and how you got to where you are now.
Yep, so my dad owned a small engineering business in Michigan, and I went to work for that, my dad at 19, and I started working as an engineer, and I design engineer. So I was in product development for many, many years. And honestly, so many years I thought this is it. I'm never doing anything else. But then kind of slowly moved to the supply chain side. And what's crazy is for so many years, I would always say, when someone would bring up logistics, I was like, I'm not going to your stupid logistics meeting. Like, I completely ignored it. Like, I would just, if somebody say, Joe, you have to go, I'd say, have one of my guys go, because I'm not going. I don't care. It's 5% of cost, don't care. Well, then when the great meltdown happened in 2008, I found myself out. I was doing a lot of work for Chrysler and with an outside company, and we didn't get paid. And so I ended up getting into the logistics business. I went to work for a great small company, and it was in trouble like everybody was at that time. But we tripled the size of the company, and I learned so much. And I learned how much I love the industry because it is so entrepreneurial. And kind of along the same time, I started writing a lot of articles about logistics while as a blogger. Then I started doing more webinars, training, and so now I do a lot of sales training of my podcast, The Logistics of Logistics, which reaches a lot of people. And I do webinars. So it's really all about, for me, is all about everything I do is helping transportation logistics companies grow their sales, except I also advise some shippers on how to manage their third-party logistics, because as this industry, transportation, logistics, warehousing, technology, becomes more and more important to the supply chain, you realize that we don't know how to work together. So, I mean, a lot of people probably looked at logistics much like I did. And that really needs to change because we all depend on it.
I think one of the things that stands out from our prep talk was that you really know your customer. And because you've been in the logistics side and you were served by the logistics side for so long, and that really struck a chord with us. And you talked about so much about trust and how important trust is and how we really have to dive into that relationship with the customer, and it goes two ways. So there was a lot of things we talked about that really got me thinking after our call. And I kind of wanted to dive into some of those with you today. But I think one of the things that I know Betsy typically really loves to go down is understanding who are your customers today?
So my customers are third-party logistics companies, and that could be transportation companies. And when you say transportation, that could be trucks, it could be boats, it could be planes. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to transport stuff. It could be at less than truckload, could be small parcel. So I work with a lot of those companies, either asset-based or guys who don't own the assets who are just brokering it. I work with a lot of technology companies who provide the software that connects the shippers to the logistics space. And I work with a lot of warehousing companies, fulfillment companies. That's become, everybody wants home delivery now. Those all are kind of, that's new business in a lot of cases. So I work with a lot of companies like that. And what I do to help them is I started off just doing some sales training. I kind of dabbled a little bit in marketing. I have a web partner, so I've done some websites. But what I'm really enjoying is I have a podcast, and actually Betsy was on it. I love the podcast because this kind of what we're doing today, I enjoy listening to that. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I started realizing this is a great platform. And so I now have some sponsors who are reaching my audience, which is big, and which is also my audience. I target customers. So any way I can help people connect with my audience, connect with their audience, that's what I do. So there is an integration. If I just throw this out, there's an integration now between sales and marketing that just wasn't there before. And I think it's so important.
I will say, I don't know that I've met a better connector than you, Joe.
Thank you.
As soon as we met, you started introducing me to people, and those were very valuable introductions. And so I really appreciate that you do that, because that's a very generous thing to do. And because of the size of your network, it helps a lot of people.
Yeah. So I that's another thing. So all my customers, whether they're marketing customers or I made a website or they come on my podcast, I always say the same thing. I'm going to get you business. And if I can't get it through you being on my podcast or building a great website, I'm going to introduce you. But it's interesting. I love to connect people. That's a personality type. Ann Holm talks a lot about this. And the challenge sometimes, though, is, when you make a great connection, I love doing it. But sometimes I'll look at my list of things to do and go, I got to make 10 introductions in the next 5 days. So I feel like now I'm getting really good at okay, get on LinkedIn. Bam, 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 bam.
Yeah. Well, you have taken that to a whole new level.
Thank you. I try.
So tell us a little bit more about your perspective of the two-way street here in customer trust and building relationship, because we typically talk about really knowing your customer and the side of the responsibility of the business or the business owner to really get to know the customer. And you have just an interesting approach of how that two-way street goes. It's not just a one-way street.
Right. So I've had some, I'll call very interesting experiences. And sometimes the only way you learn is to see it. So I worked with a very, very large shipper. And I don't think you would mind me saying this again, Ed Blackford, great guy. He was a vice president of a logistics company, but he didn't come initially from a logistics background. And when working with a whole slew of logistics companies, he said, I don't know logistics. I've been a consumer of logistics, because he's down the hall in the other departments. And he said, but I've got guys, Joe and a few others, who are helping me develop my network of logistics companies. And he said, I don't want a customer. I don't want you to treat me like a customer. I want you to treat me as a partner. And he works for a Japanese company. And he said this really was an extension of kind of their beliefs. And so he really, really worked hard to say, we're going to build a relationship here. We're going to be joined at the hip. And I really love that. And the more I think about all my experiences, it's just said it offline. If you're a provider of some service and you find your customer holding you at arm's length, and we all have had that, where they really, oh, no, I can't do lunch. No, don't come over. We can just do it by email. Send me an email. I don't want to have a meeting. And no, everything's fine. At some point, you lose that customer, or you don't do as much for that customer as you want. And I think so often it's because they don't want the relationship, or you haven't really pushed it. I think it's so important, because I think that's an experience that we've all had.
Joe, one of the things that when we were talking in our prep session, you mentioned that really struck me was with regard to feedback, and having the trust in the relationship and the open heart to actually hear the feedback, whether or not it's good or bad, how that responsibility goes both ways. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and this somewhat goes back to what I've said about Ed Blackford was this way, but I would also say I've had this experience where this provider says, "Hey, be honest with me. What do you like? What do you don't like?" And the guy's, "Oh, it's great. I just want in our business, I just want great service and a good price." And it never doesn't seem to go any deeper. But there's another piece that's very important in logistics, which is if there's a late shipment, if there was something damaged, if there's something lost, if the big project is going to be late because my logistics provider didn't get it done, couldn't get a truck, these are difficult times. Then I want my provider to be able to say, "Hey, Joe, I screwed up. What can we do to get this back on track?" And if I say, "Oh my God, this is strike two. This is it. You guys you're in double, triple probation," then that guy's not going to tell me anything anymore. So the whole idea of visibility and transparency, which is so almost cliche in our business at this point, it means so much it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but it means that I have to trust you if I'm going to provide it. And I have to trust that when I tell you bad news, that you're not going to shoot me. I have an old saying that if you keep shooting the messenger, he'll stop coming around. And I want that messenger to say, "You know where it keeps breaking down? Right here." And could I come over and could we work on that? If we don't ever get that opportunity because I'm afraid to say it and you're angry to hear it, then we screwed up.
You used an interesting phrase there a minute ago. You said pushing the relationship, and that sounds so counter to the typical way of dealing with customers. So go deeper into that. What does it mean to push the relationship? What does that look like? Maybe an example from your career and your past there.
Yeah, I'll say this, and maybe this is one way to look at it. Not everybody is connectors or relationship builders. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of people. If you have somebody who's very quiet, maybe introverted, maybe they don't want that kind of relationship. Maybe they're like, "No, you know what? I love technology because it allows me not to talk to people like you." So maybe means getting other people pulled in who really do want that relationship. Maybe it's moving people around. But as far as I think it's probably just like being in a relationship as a spouse or a girlfriend or boyfriend. You got to talk about it. You got to say, "Guys, the only way this is going to work is I have to know you and you have to know me." And I think Stephen Covey wrote that book, The Speed of Trust. If I'm providing something for Betsy and Tony and we've gotten to be good friends, we've met many times, had conversations. I know about their families. I know about what they like and dislike. I'm going to be able to kind of know what you want. So I say, they're not here and I can't reach them right now, but I know what they want because I know them. And I know exactly how I'd want to be treated if I was them.
Joe, I'd like to get into a little bit of the tactics of how you do this. So do you have a system where you keep track of all of the relationships you have? Is it a little more ad hoc? How do you manage so many relationships? And tell us again how many people you have in your LinkedIn group.
Oh, yeah, well, so there's like 104,000 people in my logistics group on LinkedIn. And I can't claim to be close friends with all of them. But, as far as managing the relationships, I don't have like a system. And I saw like the other day on TV, they had, I think it was John Rockefeller, the mogul's great grandson. And he had this enormous Rolodex and stacks. And I was thinking, good for you, but that's just not my personality type. So a lot of times I'm on LinkedIn. And when I sometimes go, like Betsy, when I introduce you to a few people, I do it via LinkedIn. So I try not to let LinkedIn become a numbers game. I really do want to connect with some of the people who are on there. So I don't think you can do it without making the phone calls. I don't think you can have a relationship in I don't think I can say, "Well, that's it. Officially have a relationship with Tony because we talked for 6 minutes on Friday, 9 minutes on Thursday. We're all set. Relationship built." I think it is what it is. Everybody's different. Every situation's different. So I think it's just, I guess it's probably no different than how do you keep your friendships alive with all your buddies.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say that because I think sometimes, and I know there's been a lot of talk about these automated LinkedIn things and how a lot of people do view it as a numbers game. And, Tony and I both agree that it's really about building a relationship. It's not about how many people you know. I think, like you said, it's like your friends, and how do you maintain those relationships?
I think I read somewhere that you can really only have like 150 relationships that are actual relationships. Beyond that, we're just their followers or, acquaintances. I mean, it's interesting. We're going through that coronavirus thing right now. So this might sound dated if someone hears it later on, but I live alone. My kids are grown, and I've been going crazy like everybody is. You say, I want to leave the house. I want to do things. But I've decided I'm going to make phone calls. So I'm calling friends from, who I haven't talked to in a while, which is weird. I have their numbers and I haven't called them. And almost like, I don't know. I feel like women are much better at this than men. But calling and saying, hey, buddy, I haven't talked to you in a long time. How you doing? How you surviving this time? And, some are like, oh, my God, thank God you called. Others, even friends, are just like, oh, hey, what do you call? Somebody died.
Yeah. I know. I've been doing kind of the same thing where like I'm intentionally reaching out to people that I just have lost touch with. And it's the same thing. You get various reactions, but more often than not, they truly appreciate knowing that someone's thinking of them. Somebody cares enough to pick up the phone or shoot over a text. And sometimes it's both. It just depends on who it is. But yeah, I think as horrible as this coronavirus thing is, there are a lot of good things that are coming out of it, lessons that we're learning about the importance of building relationships, and especially as it relates to your customer. Right. One of the things, Joe, that Tony and I were talking about that we wanted to hear more from you about is just the need to always be doing this versus waiting till there's a crisis and doing it. So can you dig into that a little bit?
Right. I think that's, and again, I'm a logistics guy, transportation guy. There's always problems in that. So even if 99 out of 100 shipments go well, the 100th doesn't go well. And sometimes this can be a business of exception. And so the only time they're calling you is for that one bad shipment. And you don't talk about those other 99. So they call and say, Joe, my God, what happened on this? You guys screwed this up again. I hate that. So what I always have done is, if I'm working with customers, I say, we're going to meet every week. We're going to go over KPIs. And the KPIs will be, very basic. I always say key performance indicators, not every metric. Don't go over 100 metrics, go over the key performance indicators, 4 or 5 things. And what I've always thought sounds very boring. Like we're going to go over KPIs and see if we met target. On-time performance should be 95%. Or 96%, is it? Go down the list. But what happens in those meetings is you do eventually get into a rhythm and somebody's like, hey, did you guys see that game last night? And hey, how'd that grandchild come out? Oh, congratulations on your engagement. All of a sudden the meetings become so much more than just going over KPIs. And we're to that point with logistics where we have a lot of technology and it's real easy and again, I always think the techies, when there's a techie among all of us who says, oh no, Betsy, you don't have to call me ever. We don't have to talk. You get an automated report to your email every morning. And I always think like, yeah, but we don't really talk about it. And that's the challenge. It's numbers, it's metrics, KPIs, it's data, but it's not really knowledge. It's really not improvement or relationship building. It's just, I sent you that. So I think I got a little off track there, but I feel like that's one of the ways to have a regular relationship or develop a relationship is to have a regular meeting.
Well, it really taps into that idea that we talk about on this podcast of really knowing your customer, because it's about knowing what matters to them from the KPI perspective, how to improve those KPIs. That's why we're in business as consultants, or in whatever field we're in. And at the same time, it's about knowing them as people. There's something I've taught for years and made sure my clients understood. There's knowing about your customer, which is what CRM systems are for, and all the data collection and data analysis we do. We know about them, but that doesn't mean we know them. right? And that's having that conversation, being able to talk about, the kids, the family, their favorite sports team, whatever it is, and going in some depth where you actually mean that is interesting. And I'm curious, I've noticed the more we've done broadcasting, or I speak on stage, the more I'm out there in front of people. What I've noticed is people feel like, because I often open up and talk a little bit about my family, or
Right.
if you're connected with me on Facebook, which I allow business people to usually connect with my personal Facebook, Betsy knows, I put stuff up about my family all the time. And it's just kind of, I'm an open book that way. And so people feel like they have this relationship with me, and I may
Right.
not know them, but
Right.
it makes the business side of things so much easier. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I totally agree that people start to think they know you because they listen to your podcast, they go to your webinars, and less so from articles. I've probably written 1,000 pages of articles and website pages, but people, it's maybe if you're a great writer, I always am prolific, not great, but I think there is a sense that people start to know you. And every once in a while I'll get some letter, and it's usually English as a second language, where it'll start off, say, some of them say Uncle Joe, which I was like, okay, whatever. I have lots of nieces and nephews, but this guy isn't one of them. And some of them say, and I think they want to say, I like what you do, but they say, I love you. And I was like, okay, you like my podcast? I was like, and by the way, it's never women. It's always dudes, dudes from some other country. And, but to that point, they feel some sense that they know you. And I think that's great. I got to say this. We all have to make phone calls to people we don't know. Years ago, I did a podcast with, a webinar with a company. We're talking about cross-border shipping to Mexico. And I think like 50 people signed up for our webinar. And I always like to call ahead of time the people who I want to talk to, because after the webinar, they kind of don't take the phone calls as readily. So I called this gal, and she was kind of short with me. She was like, not unprofessional, but just like, nah, really don't need your help right now. Thank you, but no, thank you. And the next morning I woke up, and there was an email, and it said, please call me as soon as you get this message. And I called, and it was the gal I talked to, and she said, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize when we were talking who you were yesterday. And I was like, and so I think she kind of felt she knew me, but I think she also felt like I owe you. And so she was completely open and forthcoming, still didn't get the business, but at least she was like, let me tell you how we do things here. And I was like, wow. So just getting out there made her feel like, no, I either owe you or I want to help you because you've helped me. So it's worth it, getting out there, doing the videos, doing the podcast, audio, whatever you want to do.
Well, it's interesting that you say that story lines up with a lot of what Betsy and I talked about in our book, Profitability. One aspect of what humans are seeking at our core is this human connection, this relationship, right? And you've talked about it the whole time that I've known you in the hour and a half or so that we've talked in the last few weeks here.
Yep.
And one thing that really stands out to me is that it's that the essence of connecting is a shared experience. And when they hear you or they see you, I think the more the senses that we can bring in, the more of this immersion experience, right? So you might be listening on audio right now and just hearing us talk, but you get a sense of who we are. You might be watching us on video and you get a deeper sense of who we are, right? And so that there seems to be this element of, wow, I really know this person. I can, as they're talking to me over the phone, I can see their facial expressions because I've seen them on a video or something.
Yeah, I actually just saw, so I love the comedian David Spade. So he has 2 audio books, listen to both, more than once, they're funny. And he's got that Lights Out show. And I heard him say at one of his shows, or maybe on a podcast, he said that, he goes, I'll be walking around sometimes with big stars, and he says, and people run up to the stars and it's like, hey, can I have your autograph? Or he goes, and they're kind of very formal, and because they they're meeting a movie star. He says, then they'll turn to me and go, hey, Joe Dirt, or hey, Dave, how's it going? Like I'm the guy down the street. And he goes, I guess that's a good thing. And I was thinking, yeah, that is a great thing, because you're not that guy on a pedestal. You're the guy, I want to talk to that guy.
You know, when we were talking about video, you know, we've used video for years in our business, and almost all of our calls are done via Zoom. Yeah. But what I'm hearing now with everything that's changed in our business world in the last few weeks, is how many more people, and including kids who are doing Zoom calls with their friends or with their school or whatever, just how much more commonplace that's going to be. And it does make a difference when you can sit face to face with somebody versus just hearing their voice. And I personally see that as one of the many good things that are coming out of this crisis, is that people are going to get more comfortable with these kinds of technologies that enhance the relationship. It's still not the same as being face to face. It never will be. But at least being face to face versus just an audio only, I think is a really good step in the right direction for business and getting people just comfortable with the idea. I know the first time I started doing video calls, I was uncomfortable with it. But it's just one of those things that's going to be our new normal. And I think it really enhances the experience.
Yeah, I've always believed on projects that you got to have that first, if you're going to be working on a consulting project, or you're going to be the logistics provider, you got to get on a plane, you got to get in the car, you got to go and spend a day or two, and that starts the relationship. But then after, a lot of us want to work from home or work without traveling. So I think this is a big step up from just phone calls, and I got to get my hair cut, and that's been an issue. Like, we can't do a whole bunch of Zoom meetings if we can't go to the barber or the hair salon for a few weeks.
Preaching to the choir, Joe.
I think Betsy, you were the one that says we're within a few weeks of knowing what everybody's hair color is.
Yeah, I can't take claim for that. I've seen that meme going around all over the place. But yeah, it's we're going to find out a lot about each other in the next few weeks. But
no, I love it. I love it, though. I think it's a great way to go. And it's interesting. My mom is 85. My mom called me the other day and said, "Oh, you missed the FaceTime call with your sister and your daughter." And I was like, what? I was thinking she goes, yeah, it was on Facebook, one of the Facebook. I was like, oh my God, what a cool thing. My mom is stuck in the house. She's 85. So in this coronavirus thing, she shouldn't be leaving. But my sister who's down in Florida and my daughter who's down in Portland all got on, and my other daughter and me somehow missed it. But I was like, what a cool thing. I have a buddy of mine in Steve, and we talk quite a bit. And sometimes he gets very mercenary where he's like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do this. I don't care about the friendships. I don't care about this. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, it's all about connecting with people. I'm like, you were like Jekyll and Hyde that way. And more he's saying, you know what? Stop me if I go down the path that business isn't personal, because it is. And, I think we have always had this idea where this is my business life and this is my personal life and there's no overlaps. But I feel like that is, as we're all working from home, when the cat walks by in the screen and the baby's crying in the background, the idea that you go, nope, this is business and this is personal. And I have a business relationship with Tony and Betsy, but that's it. I think we're limiting ourselves. And I think we're limiting the depth of those relationships and those conversations. And if I don't understand you completely, how can I ever serve you the way you're supposed to be served?
Exactly. I saw a meme just yesterday, and it was a pie chart of people logging on Zoom calls, and it had just little slices of different things that happen on a Zoom call. And it was like 23% just wanted to see what their coworkers' home office looked like, or something like that. Just you start to see a bigger picture under these kinds of circumstances where people are working from home. I got to figure out the lighting.
Because I was like in the other room, I was like where I normally record my podcast, that wasn't working, and I was like, oh my God. In his studio.
But I feel too that people are getting a lot more forgiving of imperfection in this modern era that we're in now, in the midst of the coronavirus, but hopefully soon in the post-coronavirus era. I think people are just a lot more understanding, and I think that's going to help the relationship development as well. People are understanding, people are, it's an imperfect world, and I think maybe people are starting to understand that a little bit more deeply and being a lot more gracious in things when they don't exactly go according to plan. Do you agree with that?
Yep. And yes, I for sure do. And I think there was, I spent some time with a Sandler sales guy one time. I didn't take the course, but I remember him saying to start the meeting, he said, notice I was here 10 minutes before everybody else, and that I'm best dressed in this room. And we're all like, oh yeah, great. And then he said, because that's what a sales guy is supposed to do. He's supposed to come in, he's supposed to be tall. He's supposed to be 6 foot tall and ideally athletic and good looking and well dressed and well spoken. And he said, and he goes, everyone agree? And we're all like, oh yeah, sure. That's exactly what that's what a salesperson is supposed to do. And he said, really, that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to connect with people. We're supposed to relate to people. And if I'm coming off as perfect and you say, oh, okay, I'll come in here and I'll be George Clooney and super well dressed, and I just drove up in a Rolls Royce, yeah, we're all going to connect.
Yeah.
I mean, Tony and I, of course, because we're equals to him, but no, so I think there is, getting that glimpse of the cat walking through the screen. You go, yep, that's my life too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to see all of this unfolding as we talk about, COVID-19, the coronavirus, and what's happening right now, and the shift it's making in our lives, our connections, the humanity that's coming through. I think that's such a critical thing for us to recognize. And in my mind, it's like we've got to grasp this and recognize how we're behaving now and take that forward with us, so that in business we can develop deeper sense of trust and connections, because the people we're connected to today during this period of time, we're going to develop that relationship with. But are we going to take that learning forward when we're no longer in this situation? Because this is temporary. Are we going to, develop those relationships at that level? And, you talked when we first talked on the prep call about the importance of visibility and transparency. We had kind of an interesting conversation around that. And I think, to your point about being on video now with Zoom, there's a whole lot more visibility and a whole lot more transparency involved.
Yeah, and that transparency, I think what was your quote about transparency and visibility, Tony?
Visibility is about seeing, transparency is about understanding.
Yep, I like that. And again, am I going to give transparency to somebody who is going to punish me for it? There really has to be kind of some understanding that I can share all the problems we had last week with the shipments or with whatever we're doing. Only if I know that's going to be, we're going to have a constructive conversation. And I heard some people say it this way. Okay, I appreciate you taking these problems to me. Completely understand. We just started. This is how we're going to become world class. You sharing the problems. Ideally, I don't want you sharing the same problems week after week after week. I want to see, a progression, but this is how we're going to become world class. And, if I don't trust you, if I don't have a relationship with you, if I think I'm going to be punished for my transparency, then it's not going to happen. I'm going to lie.
One of the things that brings me great joy in the work that we do in our company, the Congruity Group, with customer advisory boards, is just watching our clients take in all this feedback from the customers, because they're not going to fight back with the customers, right? You're not going to get real defensive and shoot the messengers when the messengers are actually your customers.
Right.
So it's really good to see. And the ones that really do that well are the companies that really explode, because they are listening with an open heart to the feedback from the customers. And I think, and plus that just builds the relationship, because then the customer trusts the provider as well. So that two-way relationship is really built when the walls come down, and it's not a defensive posture, but rather a welcoming posture for the feedback. And sometimes it's not easy. I mean, you hear some feedback that it kind of punches you in the gut. It's not always easy, but it's what helps your company propel forward.
Yep. And, it's interesting you use the term open heart, Betsy, and it means you got to be a little vulnerable. It means you got to open yourself up to criticism, open yourself up to, I'm not perfect. And I've been talking to you a lot lately, and I've been developing this sponsorship for my podcast because my goal is to do 100 podcasts this year. And I realized how much time I'm spending. And I was like, I need sponsors, or I'll be living in the street because of my damn podcast. It's an expensive hobby. But as I was developing these sponsorships, I just talked to you, and I remember saying as I gave a proposal, I said, you know what? I really want your honest feedback on this proposal. Because we all write in that you send a proposal and you're like, feedback, welcome. Is that always true? It's just kind of like what we write at the bottom of an email. And I said, I really want this to be a great relationship, and it won't be if I'm not providing something. And I said, if it comes to you in a week or 2 weeks, I'm going to ask you over and over again, what do you want from me? What can I provide? Just tell me, what's your biggest problem? And I think it's important that we open ourselves up to that, because if you kind of say, here you go, world-class proposal. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm great. Here you go. Try not to cry as you read through it.
I just heard yesterday, and I can't remember who did this, but I thought, what a great idea, that when you send a proposal, you also send the video with it too, so that you can say exactly what you just said. Like, I really want your feedback. If I don't have it, this isn't going to go as well as it can. And you speak openly to the person as you're delivering the proposal via email. And I thought, that is not rocket science, but what a great idea.
Yeah, there was a copywriter I talked to recently, and he said, as I'm on your webpage, and I'm redoing my website always, and he said, right on the front page, it should say what you sell, but then right below it, there should be a video. He says, 'cause what they're buying, Joe, is you've got this big following. They are buying you. And he said, so there should be a video of you speaking directly to the camera. It doesn't need to be slick graphics or anything. You speaking directly to the camera saying, this is what I'm selling. This is the value that I'm here. I'm selling this to you. And I thought, God, that's not hard. And again, it's you could do it with your mobile phone. And I thought, yeah, that's where we're all heading.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's not something you get a spokesmodel for. It's not something you get, slick graphics for. If you saw it as like, oh my God, they must have spent $50,000 on that, you're like, I don't need that. I think that's one of the things that people seem to like about, this new age, where it's not old Hollywood where you're seeing Joan Crawford and she's, oh my God, is she like royalty? And, there's a photo shoot with the right lighting and everything. So there's a place for that, but there's another place for just selfie. here's me on vacation, or here's me serving a client.
Well, I think that speaks to the whole transparency element of things of today. Facebook Live and these Zoom calls, they're unedited and we're live. So we get to see people as they really are, as they're going to show up in a meeting if we were to meet them in a meeting. And I think those, I first time I did a training, business partner of mine was listening to the recording and it was the post edit. And he's like, that doesn't sound like you. And the reason it didn't sound like me is because the editor took out a lot of the space between the words, where as I'm talking, I naturally stop and think as I'm speaking, right? And so there may be a little pause between the words, or I slow down, and all those patterns were gone. So it didn't sound like me. And it got me thinking about how we've got to be more authentic in what we're delivering, so people really do feel like they have that connection with us. Because if it doesn't feel like us, doesn't sound like us, then it's not us. There's this element of the human brain is so interesting, because we got this pattern recognition thing that happens within us. I've seen you a few times. I could probably pick you out of a crowd, right? Because I've seen you, I've got your mannerisms down just from watching you. But at the same time, I don't really know how tall you are. I don't have a picture of that. And this happened to me with a client one time. I showed up at their office after 2 years doing video calls, right? And he walks in, and I'm looking a little bit down on him. He's like a 5'10", I'm 6'2", and he's looking up, being like, "You're taller than I thought you would be." And I was like, "You're shorter than I thought you'd be." But it was just because we're all the same height on the video camera, so we didn't know that he different. It's kind of funny. But that's that age we're living in, as you said, where we've got so much more transparency. Everything is visible, but now we're being transparent, and I think that that's such a valuable thing. And earlier you talked about reciprocity and you talked about giving this call before you went on your webinar, and this woman felt like she needed to, once she understood who you were, needed to at least call you back. I think that's an element that in relationships, it's not I'm going to hold this over you. It's this sense of, I'm truly going to give to you. What
Right.
you do with that is yours. But if we do it in the right spirit, most often people are going to come back and say, wow, I feel like it's not a sense of owing, but a sense of like, I want to do something for you now. It's that's reciprocity. And so just in the whole conversation we've had here, just that stands out to me, something it's been unsaid probably, but I wanted to pull that out there because it's really in essence what a trust built relationship is founded on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll say this is I create a lot of content, and I always have. And I've always felt like I'm going to give as much away as I can while, still building a good business. And there's a lot of people who are kind of along those lines now. And I love that. And there's a guy, Seth Godin, who's, I think, one of the best marketing writers, maybe the best marketer out there. And he says, when I write a book, I think he's got the largest blog, and all he does is send email every morning. So if you follow Seth Godin, you get an email from him. And I swear sometimes it's like somehow he knows what's in my head. I mean, he writes stuff that is just dead on. But he said, when I write a book, and I tell my audience that I'm writing it, a lot of them buy it without looking at, I buy it, and they said, because I want to support you. Because you've given me so much over the years. And so I probably bought every one of his books. And if somebody said, Seth Godin's writing a new book, I'm like, yeah, I'll buy it. It could be on something unrelated to what I'm interested in, but I'm going to support Seth Godin because, like I said, he's kind of provided so much free stuff. And it's not even at this point about, me being reciprocal. It's about, I just want to support a guy who has done so much for me.
So, Joe, I know that you have your podcast and your LinkedIn group. What else is on the horizon for you and your business?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I've got this podcast, and my goal is to really build a sales platform, and it takes time. You guys are doing it, that is you. And I love to sell my own stuff, but I like the idea of partnering with people and having them be my sponsors. And what's interesting to me is listening to podcasts. I fast forward sometimes through commercials. So I was like, not going to do that. I think what I'm going to have is my sponsors actually be on my podcast, and they're experts. And I was thinking to myself, I don't want to work with just anybody. I don't want to have just anybody as sponsors because I don't want to sell something that I don't believe in. So I was like, I want to find guys who are transforming this space. So it's, for me, is I don't want to work with everybody. I want to work with 10, 12, 15 companies that I really like, and I like the people there, and I love the product they're bringing. And Matt Collins, who we all know, Matt always says, I don't want to be part of any bad stories. I only want to be part of good stories. And if I don't believe in their product, if we don't have a relationship that makes sense to me, I don't want to do that. Maybe I'm getting old. My kids are grown. I don't have to do anything. I don't want to do it anymore. So I want to have, it sounds so corny to say, I want to live more authentically, but having those relationships, doing work I think is valuable, partnering with people who I really like and trust, who I believe in their product. That's what I want to do. That's my goal. And however we should be doing it, whether it's writing articles, which is, I'll call a few years ago, or webinars, which I still do, but less, and now podcasts. Who knows? Maybe I'll do it. My podcast, I can do a video like you guys do. I have avoided it because of, this thing going on. So that's where I'm heading.
Awesome.
Excellent. Yeah, so this has been fantastic. So I'm thinking there's been a couple of really key themes here that I just wanted to pull out for the listeners, because we really want them to take action on what they can learn from. So number one, build that trust and build it early. As you said very early in the podcast, it's not about starting now. It's, if you haven't done it yet, start now. But
Right.
if you build those relationships, you're not going to need to worry about it when you have to deliver a bad message. We all know there's going to be failure in business, right? So start building your relationships now if you haven't. If you have, keep them growing, keep them going. Think about alternative ways to build those relationships. Like we're talking about the video here, doing Zoom calls, I think is a great way to do it. And it's by necessity right now, but it's something that really works out. Or when we can't get there in person, when we're allowed to do that again, when we can get back on the road and travel. And I think the other element of this is just recognizing that business is something Betsy and I talk about. We talked about this in the book too. Business to business is really person to person. And you've got to remember that in your connections and your relationships. So is there anything else that you'd like to put out there, kind of like a final word, another lesson that everyone should really think about?
Yep. Well, and this is really kind of from a branding perspective. And by the way, I've been really enjoyed being on your show. You'll notice the biggest brands, McDonald's and Coca-Cola and Jeep and all those, they aren't trying to make the point that look how big and successful we are. They're all bringing, they all want to make it about the local kid working at Burger King who's going to college and that one-to-one relationship. And I think what's interesting is sometimes we as small business people, and I think there's so many of us out here, who feel like, oh, I've got to puff myself up. I have to make myself look like I'm mega corporation. And then mega corporation is saying, we want it to be that one-on-one relationship. Even though we're super big, it's all about person to person. And so we don't have to be embarrassed about where we're at or what we're doing. It's no matter how big you get, to Tony's point, it's still a person to person relationship. You're working at State Farm. State Farm doesn't want you to say, hey, you're working with a Fortune 500 company. No, you're working with your local State Farm guy who's down the street. So I think it's the relationships and the people.
Well, Joe, thank you so much. We are honored to have you as a guest on our show, and you've brought so much value to this conversation, and your insights, I'm sure, will help all of our listeners take action. As we said, we're very much about this podcast being a place where people can come and listen to our guests and then leave with some actionable insights. So we really thank you for what you've brought to the table today.
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed working with you guys. I learned quite a bit this last week when we were prepping and doing this podcast.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Wow, Joe is just a wonderful guest. I mean, his perspective on how to build relationships with your clients and how they're a two-way street and that foundation of trust really stands out to me as a something to think about. As we said in the beginning, really know your customers, our podcast, and we usually talk about it from the perspective of the business knowing the customer. But as Joe says, it's also about the customer knowing the business, the vendor, and how that goes both ways.
Exactly. And he truly is a master at this. And I speak from experience, as I mentioned on the podcast. As soon as we met and got to know each other a little bit better, he started figuring out, who can I introduce Betsy to? And not just saying it, but actually doing it. Because we all know those people that are like, oh yeah, I'll introduce you to so-and-so. And then it never happens, or you have to follow up 3 times and ask them, hey, I'd really like that introduction. And that's not how Joe goes about it. And I think it shows, because he has some phenomenal relationships. And what's really cool too about that is the people that he's introduced me to have all basically said, any friend of Joe's is a friend of mine, and absolutely, let's talk. And so when you get that kind of respect and influence on relationships, it's really priceless.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. And I think just the insights that he pulled out for us, I want to encourage the listeners, take your notes, look at your notes, and figure out what is it that you can put into place here. What type of things can you add to your relationship building practices that you may already have? And if you don't have them, what could you do? I mean, we talked about a number of things like, do you have a video? Do you jump on a podcast? Even if it's just being interviewed on these things to start with, that's a great place for you to build a bit of rapport with people that don't know you yet. And you can share that with your existing clients, people that you may not have phone calls with or regular meetings with, so they get to know you a little bit better. I mean, I know probably 3 or 4 years ago, I started being a guest on podcasts. And now here we are doing our own podcast because people want more. People want to hear more from me. And it's a great thing to do. So I think that building that relationship, even if it's, to a camera or to a microphone, if you will, for now, it lets people get a little more transparency into who you are and how you work and what your belief systems are and your passions. And that helps them buy into you as they're doing business with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I gain, like you said, Tony, doing these podcasts and he said, we just get to hear from so many great people. And I just feel like this is our field, and yet we're still learning a lot. And I learned a lot from Joe today. So
absolutely.
Yeah, great.
Thanks for joining us again on the Really Know Your Customer podcast. We are delighted to have you as guests and would love to hear from you. Reach out to us and let us know who you'd like to hear from on the show next.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Really Know Your Customer. We hope you gained a lot of value from being here today. If you want to learn more about the work Betsy and Tony do to help their clients thrive, visit Betsy at thecongruitygroup.com and Tony at tonybodoh.com. See you next time on the Really Know Your Customer show.